Now we're going to go ahead and actually fill out this property by creating choices inside of any given field. In our case, it's going to be our state field. So before I actually even start the field itself, I'm going to go ahead and declare my choices. So my choices are going to be a class inside of the video model itself. So there's going to be video state options, and it's going to be models.text choices. Now, this is actually really, really useful for many different reasons, which we'll see over, well, the next few videos. First of all, we'll go ahead and say publish equals to PU, or capital PU in this case, and then we'll also write out published. Okay, so what's actually happening here is first we're declaring a constant, and then we are going to be setting it equal to our DB value, and then our user display value, which we'll see in just a moment. So we have published and then draft. Okay, so this is going to be DR and draft. Now, of course, we can have other options than just this, and you would do it in this exact same method. So PU comma published, right? And then draft equals to whatever it is published, and so on. Okay, so if I wanted, let's say, another one being just like what you've seen on YouTube probably is unlisted and UN, and again unlisted, and so on, and maybe even private. This would be a few other options that you might end up using, right? But I'm not going to use those. I'm just going to use the two options to make it really simple on myself, and I'll actually call this publish, not published. Okay. So now that I have these choices, what I want to do is actually set my state field being related to these choices. So state being a models.CharField, and the max length is going to be 2, and then choices is going to be equal to this video state options dot choices. Let me just close down the Explorer so it's easier to see. But there we go. Okay, so max length being 2, what does that mean exactly? We'll talk about that too. The next thing being our default value being the item being in draft mode. So video state options dot draft, the constant of dot draft. Okay. And constants are always capitalized in Python, or very commonly capitalized in Python. Constants are things that don't typically change. It is still technically a variable, but that's just a semantic thing to do. Okay, so now that we've got these state options, what's going on here? Well, actually, the easiest way to see this is by doing python manage.py, make migrations, and then python manage.py, migrate. And then we're also going to jump into the admin. So python manage.py run server. I realize I didn't run tests. We'll do that in a minute. So if we go back into our proxy item here, we have this state, and we've got this drop down. Okay. So by default, the state is showing me draft, which if I actually go back into the admin and make that as a list display, being the state, in fact, we could also make it a list filter, which makes more sense than probably active does, because the state is a little bit more robust and easier to read. So back into all videos, we now see published and draft. Okay, so if I actually click on one of these, let's say published, what I see up here is state __ exact equals to PU. So this is actually doing that filter for me. If I do draft, it's DR. And that is going to be these two values. So yet again, we see that the database value, what's actually stored in the database, is either PU or DR. That is what happens with these choices and the default. Okay. So what's cool about this is it means that our database will end up being quite a bit smaller, could be quite a bit smaller based off of this state, which is awesome. That means that I can filter things down quite a bit, right? So the max length should be 2 because we're only ever really going to store 2 characters, PU, DR. Now, of course, if we wanted 5 characters, you could totally do that. But again, this is much, much smaller and just a lower footprint in general. So the next thing would be, okay, now that I toggle between this state, let's say, for instance, this video one right here, I want to toggle between the state to publish and hit save, okay? So yeah, sure enough, it is now of the state of published, but I actually want to register when that actually happens. This is actually really easy to do. So first off, we create a timestamp, and I'm going to break this down again. So the timestamp is going to be models.dateTimeField, auto now add being false, and auto now being false, and blank equals to true, and null equals to true. Okay, and I'll explain auto now and auto now add in a moment, probably in a later video. But what we want to do is actually set this publish timestamp when this toggles. There's a few different ways on how we can go about doing this, but what I can do is override the save method for this entire model. So overriding the save method is sometimes encouraged, sometimes discouraged. In this case, it's going to be fine. We probably could use a signal, which we haven't even talked about yet. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and use the overrided save method. So what I want to do here is I want to check the state. So if self.state, and I want to check to see if it's equal to the publish state. So how do we actually check what the publish state is? Well, there's a simple way to do it is use now self dot. So now we would use self dot video state options, what those options are, dot publish, and this is now a published state. So we can say parent save as published. And then all I would do now is return the original save method of args and keyword args. And that's basically allowing the original save to actually run. So now that I've got this, what I want to actually do is check one more thing, is I want to check to make sure that publish is none. So publish timestamp is none. So now I actually want to save the timestamp for the published moment, essentially. So to do this, it's referencing that, again, self.publish timestamp, and now using a built-in model, or module rather, from Django.utils import time zone. We're going to grab the time zone, and this will give me a date time object that will allow this to be set to whatever that current time is. So this will really only be set one time, right? It's as soon as we run it into publish. If I change it back to being draft, it's not going to necessarily change. So I could also add in an else clause in here, basically saying that if these two conditions are true, great. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and say self dot is none. In fact, I probably want to make it a little bit more explicit and say if it is in draft, then we'll make it none. Okay, cool. So now we've got a way to actually set a publish timestamp and also a way to toggle it. So let's go ahead and verify this first in the admin. Oops, no such column, publish timestamp. Of course there's not. We didn't make our migration. So let's go ahead and run python manage.py, make migrations, and then python manage.py migrate, and then python manage.py test. Cool. So now we have that publish option. Let's go ahead and rerun this server. And now what we can do is actually set it. So notice that the publish timestamp is now in here. I do have it as saved, but this is none. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that. And there we go. It actually publishes right now. I go back to draft, it removes it. That's really nice. Now, of course, if I am going to be moving this state around and I don't want my users to actually set it, that's when we would go into the admin of the published timestamp. I believe published is the word. Nope, it's publish timestamp. So now I can't actually even set that one. Now, of course, on the proxy model, we could totally do that if we wanted to. We could change whether or not we want the user to be able to set the actual published timestamp as well. So you kind of override what the state default is sort of doing for us. But of course, if I can just move and toggle back and forth between draft and publish, it's going to give me those new timestamps, which I think is also really, really clean and really nice. Okay, cool. So before we go much further, I do need to test to ensure that those things are actually working. So let's go ahead and do that now.